Hi, welcome to the next round of meta deck analysis. This week we'll be targeting all of the decks changes since the following week into the beginning of February. So we'll see how this meta actually stacks up. And spoiler alert, the format has definitely changed. So I'm kind of excited about talking about it. I think, like I said, the last few weeks, this is definitely becoming, I think, a good place when it comes to Pioneer. You see, when we get into it, you'll see a very big, diverse amount of decks across the board. And I think for the most part, everyone's archetype type is in the format and represented in tier 1, tier 2. So, no further ado, let's get in. And we have one deck to talk about today that has been putting up some results, which is kind of interesting. Even though it technically is Nykthos, it's not the traditional Nykthos. So, Thief of Crowns, you're getting featured in today's episode. Let's dive in. So, the number 1 slot has been taken over by Gruul Prowess. This deck is not, I thought it was the Tarka Red version. No, it's actually the other version. It has the 4 talents and playing all the mice and stuff. So, every turn, we just get an extra trigger, put it on the hero or the Valiant other one, and just kind of go to town. It's been putting up decent results. It's been the most performing deck. As you can see, there's 88 decks the past 2 weeks. And that's a huge dip from Rakdos Demons, which it used to be in the 120s. Prowess, which used to be around, I think, the same number of decks as Gruul Prowess. So that's really nice to see overall. So the fact that Gruul Prowess is on a 10% increase, while Rakdos Demons and Prowess are on a 2 to 5% decrease. Now, green still continues to be about 1.5% on the increase, which is kind of nice. Like I said, I like the fact that Green Devotion is represented. It is a very pastimey deck. It has always been around in Pioneer, so I'm happy that it's back. Even though it's sometimes it can be kind of painful, but overall, like the turns that goes off in combos. There's even a new version that we're going to be talking about a little bit later, but the fact that it still can just go over the top of demons really helps, kind of push demons down into a basically 11% deck to 12. So that's pretty good. That's like a healthy range. So every deck seems to fall suit in a healthy medium here. You might be like, oh, well, Kebbie, there's not really any big tournaments other than the challenges. Okay. We have our Isip Phoenix coming up a little bit, making its way back up to, an upper top 5 deck. So that's really nice to see. Pixies, of course, Esper has been on the rise. Actually, it's kind of just showed up the last few weeks. It's basically been ported over from Standard. If you want to see gameplay of that, check out my other channel. I will be covering decks that I'm trying to port over from Standard into Pioneer and see how they actually do. And the first episode, of course, was Esper Pixie, because I figured I would be trying Dimir Bounce at some point when I get around to doing the Pioneer, because I'm also doing the top decks in Pioneer, along with top decks in Standard being ported. So, like I said, if you're interested in competitive more decks, that is probably where you want to go check out my other channel, the ECG channel. So, go check that out. We also have Esper Pixie, like I said, it's basically showed up. Coco is continuously dropping. Now, I'm not really sure what the cost for that actually is. I haven't really actually seen its matchup against something like Gruul Prowess or Rakdos Prowess. For the most part, it does clog up the board pretty well, but clearly it's not enough to warrant its, staying into the race. Enigmatic Incarnation is on a slight dip, not really anything to be worried about. It's about the same amount of numbers, percentage-wise. Dimir Bounce, sticking around the 2 to 3% meta range, and Dimir Ninjas is represented there as well. So it's kind of weird that we have 2 Dimir decks represented in like the top 10 best decks of the format right now. Red Deck Wins has been on the huge dip. It seems like the Red Deck Wins players have kind of conceded the fact that Gruul Prowess is better, maybe, and that they are pivoting and moving over to that, which is why there is a huge increase in Gruul Prowess. But I could be wrong. Let me know in the comment section if you are a Red Deck Wins player and you did not move over. We have our Niv is still on the dip. So that's kind of interesting, right? So that tells me that, Niv is struggling in this current meta, which makes some sense, right? Because Niv probably doesn't do all that well into Pixie. just because of the fact that it's cheap cards. Your cards are expensive, and you have a lot of instances of sorceries, which I guess are pretty reasonable at exiling the discard effect. And this town ain't big enough, kind of just is a tempo loss for you. Spirit still dipping. Junsack control still dipping. Boros burn as minimal amount of points, and Fang is minimal amount of points. So overall, the meta is doing the triangle, so it's kind of nice. It's what I was hoping for. Like I said, it's really what you want is your decks to constantly be shifting. The top deck always, when it gets to the top, decks adjust and it gets knocked down, something else comes back. And always, an ever-ending cycle of that, so that way the format doesn't get stale or stagnant. And I think that's really represented here. Our diversity of decks here is quite nice. We have a little bit of tempo decks with pixies, ninjas, so those are nice little things there. We have a decent amount of burn representation with Gruul and Rakdos and red deck wins. We have mid-range represented with, demons. You could argue that Niv is a little bit slower mid-range. We have one control deck at the bottom, but control, then we have our ramp decks with Incarnation and Green Devotion. So like I said, everything is kind of here, except for one single control deck. Arguably, you could state there's not that many combo decks in the top here. We do have our Junsack, which arguably is a combo deck. And usually they tell you whoever plays it should think of the mindset as a combo player. So I think that actually is probably the only combo deck here. That's kind of sad, I guess. You may think of it that way. But every other thing else is represented here. We even have taxes, one of. So, there's no complaints at all from me with how this meta is shifting. So, yeah, let's dive into the actual deck list that I have to talk about, which is kind of like this weird mixture of a deck that died, but got revived, and I think in a better way. Let's get into that. So, I've been playing on stream last week, this devotion deck that has been showing up a lot in challenges and in leagues. So the one negative thing that I found with this deck when piloting it, you could very rarely actually cast this Oculus. You're strictly just wanting to Fiend Artisan it or collect a company it. And I'm kind of wondering if maybe you shouldn't be playing 4 copies of Oculus. It's just such a dead card in your hand more often than I like to admit. We have a 4 and 4 on our elves, which is pretty nice. Feed Artisan is quite nice to be able to sack our elves when they're no longer needed to get an Oculus. Or we have our 2 drops with Sharp-Eyed Rookie and the Pack Leader. Then we have extra mana with our Mammoth. And then nicely rounding things out, we have our 4 Ogre Trolls and 4 Reborn, or 2 Reborns and 2 Tyvars with our 4 Coco. So this deck is actually kind of fun to play. I had a blast playing it on stream, so if you want to see actual gameplay footage of this deck, you check out my archive for the live. Sideboard, we did have some Hunter's Talents in case we need some removal. Also, the Trample is really nice against aggro decks to make sure our stuff gets over the top, deal some damage. Curator for a little bit of graveyard hate, plus Frillback. We have, for a little bit of removal, we have a Monstrous Emergence. 2 Stone Brains, decent for combo and control. 2 Shepards as a way to hate on counter magic. 2 Frillbacks for a little bit of artifact and enchantment hate, and adjacent to the life gain or potentially graveyard hate. And then we have 2 Damping Spheres in case we face Lotus or Phoenix maybe. So overall, this deck felt pretty solid. I have no complaints at all about the deck. Overall, I think this is the spiciest deck that came out of this last few weeks. When I was looking at the last week of actual deck list, there was a lot of the same deck, so typically I don't cover that kind of stuff. So I try to find the spiciest deck that done anything, at least cover one deck. So if you ever see me, I guess in the future, cover a deck that you think is technically it's meta, but it's less meta, I'll cover it just because there's nothing else to cover. I'd rather push up a tier 2.5. Back up if I can, because I do actively want to encourage the meta keep shifting. So by pushing up, propping up the tier 2.5s, hopefully could keep the thing flowing instead of everyone just gravitating to the top. So let me know in the comment section what you guys thought about this deck. If you are a Thief of Crowns, hopefully you enjoyed me covering it. So I typically, like I said, I like to cover decks. Because I think it's pretty nice and it gives props to the actual deck designers. and maybe even encourage more players to just, brew a little bit. This deck, pretty spicy. Got it. I'll talk to you guys next week. Hopefully we see even more adjustments after, I'm pretty sure that would be Ether Drift being released. So we might see some cards there. I'm not sure how I'm going to feel about it, but I'll still try to cover as much as I can. And I'll talk to you guys next time. Shout out to all my supporters. And if you want to see any other content from me, check out either one of these 2 videos and playlist. And I'll talk to you soon.